Hello everyone. Hi, how are you doing? I hope you are doing good. So welcome to another video of chapter 9 control and coordination. Up till now we were discussing the type of the type of synapses, that is electrical and chemical synapse, and we saw the difference between the two also, and we discussed in detail regarding the chemical synapses. Now in today's video we will be talking about how the actual nerve impulse or the electrical impulse is generated and how it is conducted and transmitted from one side to another side. Okay, very, very important. So let's begin. So first, what is nerve function? Basically, the function of the nerve is to conduct, carry, and transmit the nerve impulse, the information or the nerve impulse or the electrical impulse. Okay, this we are talking in sense of this function, nerve function, will depend on the charge difference across the neuron membrane. So when we are talking about the transmission or conduction of the nerve impulse, basically we are talking about the differences in the charges, that is positive charge, negative charge across the membrane. So if this is the membrane, so the charges, what is outside the membrane, that is on the outside of the neuronal membrane and the inside of the neuronal membrane. Okay, as you see over here, as now you can see that I have put plus on the outside membrane and sorry, not here, inside membrane, negative, more negative. So depending upon what is the charge, plus, more plus outside the neuronal membrane and more minus inside the neuronal membrane, that will define whether the nerve is carrying information, carrying the electrical impulse, and so on. Okay, so let's begin our discussion. So nerve function depends, basically when we are talking about the transmission or conduction, we are talking about the changes in the charges, plus and minus. Okay, so we will begin with the nerve or the neuron at rest. At rest, it is not carrying any impulse. It is not conducting any electrical impulse. It is not carrying any signal. So at rest, the plasma membrane of the neuron has potential energy, which is also known as the membrane potential. Okay, what is this potential energy? How do we measure that potential energy? It is just slightly negative in the inside and slightly positive on the outside. Slightly negative in the inside and slightly positive on the outside of the cell. At this stage, when there are more positive on the outside of the plasma membrane and negative ions in the inside the plasma membrane, then at this stage, the neuron is resting. It is not carrying any signal. Okay. Yes. Moving forward, keep this point in mind very clearly. So this is the resting potential, okay, which is the voltage across the plasma membrane of the resting neuron. Fine. So this will exist. How is this positive and negative? More positive on the outside and more negative on the inside. This is because of the ion. More positive ions on the outside of the neuron and less negative, less positive ions in the inside of the neuron. So this makes the charges more positive on the outside and less positive in the inside. So this is the inside. This is the plasma membrane lipid bilayer. You see more sodium ions. Sodium are plus charged, yes, positive ion. So they are more on the outside. So that is why the outside of the neuron will have more plus. They are less in the inside. You have K plus also. So here it will be less positive, means what? More negative. Okay, so the resting potential exists because of the differences in the ion concentration of the fluids inside and outside the neuron. So what is this ions inside the neuron? K plus is high, sodium is low. Inside the neuron, potassium ions are more, sodium is low. Outside the neuron, as you see in the figure, sodium is high and potassium is low. Outside of the neuron, potassium is low and sodium is high. Okay, so keep these things in mind. This is at the resting stage when the neuron is not carrying any signal. When it is not carrying any signal, more sodium ions on the outside membrane, plasma membrane of the neuron, and less the potassium ions in outside the neuron. Okay, in the resting stage. So outside, more sodium, less sodium, uh, Okay, I just got confused again. Outside of the neuron, more sodium, less potassium. Inside of the neuron, less potassium, less sodium, low sodium, and more potassium. Okay, keep this clearly in mind. Moving forward, okay, so when we talk about how there is generation of the nerve impulse, how the signal is generated, basically it will generate as a change in the membrane potential. Now we know what is membrane potential, right? Outside positive, inside negative. Outside positive because more sodium ion outside. Inside negative because less sodium ion inside, potassium ion is more inside. So this is the nerve signal will begin as soon as there is change in this potential, as soon as the ions move across the membrane. So this will be how this will be caused. This will be caused by any stimulus, any information coming in, okay, any signal coming in. So stimulus is any factor that causes this nerve impulse to be generated. The stimulus can be anything. This will basically alter the permeability portion of the membrane. So outer more sodium was there, inside more potassium was there. So this will get reversed. There will be permeabilities. Ions will move in and out when there is electrical impulse that is being there present at the site. It will allow the ions to pass through and it will change the membrane potential. So when there is electrical impulse that is getting transmitted or carried by the nerve impulse, this portion will get reversed. More positive on the inside and more negative on the outside. Resting phase mein, what was there? More positive on the outside, more negative in the inside. So this will change when there is electrical impulse, conduction and generation. So how this is brought about? So an action potential will be transmitted from the cell body, from the dendron to the axonal site. Okay, so this will cause the membrane voltage from resting phase. It will reach to maximum level. It will reach to the action potential level and then it will go back to its normal state. Okay, so just like in the previous chapter we saw regarding the conduction of the heartbeat, like polarization, depolarization, and then again repolarization means what? Let's say the filling of the ventricles, then the ventricles will give the blood to the aorta and the pulmonary trunk, and then again they will be ready to receive the blood. So like simply same over here. They now here, let's say it is at the resting potential. When action potential comes, this resting potential moves to the active state. And then once here the electrical impulse is there, it will now transmit to the next site and this site will go back to its previous state, that is the resting state. Okay. So the action potential propagates itself along the axon in one direction. It will always be in one chain, no bidirectional. So self-propagated in one-way chain reaction along a neuron. Okay, as we have just discussed the properties in the previous video, either the conduction will be across the neuron or there will be no conduction of the electrical impulse. Okay, and this signal, this action potential frequency will depend upon their strength. As we discussed in the properties of the nerve impulse, a weak signal will not trigger the change in the membrane potential. If multiple weak signals are there, then it will multiple weak signal will come together and they will make one strong signal, and then it can cause the electrical impulse to be conducted and transmitted through the axon of the neuron. Okay, there should be this threshold value, threshold stimulus for the axon, for the neuron to get excited. So that is what is the frequency of the action potential changes with the strength of the stimulus. So how this is brought about? So let's say this is the axon length. Okay, this is earlier it was in a resting state. So when resting stage mein what happens? Outside positive and inside negative. Yes. Now there is signal coming. In response to a signal, the soma end, that is this over here of the axon, becomes depolarized. Now the change in the membrane potential. Now how this change is brought about? Sodium ions, sodium channels will open. What was in the resting stage? This is the resting stage. Let's say outside positive and inside negative. Okay, outside sodium was more and inside potassium was more. So when the signal arise from resting, it will go into active stage. Active means depolarized state. What will happen? Sodium ions which were more on the outside will now come inside. What will happen? More positive charge has come inside now. So it will cause more positive in the inside and more negative on the outside. So less negative, sodium ions now. So negative on the outside. Okay, at this stage, at this active stage, when the signal is there in the neuron at this particular site, at this particular place, this is known as depolarization. Okay, the change in the membrane potential. Yes, so sodium ion will come in because the sodium channels will open. Sodium will flush in. Okay, then the signal has been transmitted here. Now it will move to the next position, next site. Same thing will happen over here. And the previous part of the axon will return to its original place. Okay, the depolarization spreads down the axon. Meanwhile, the first part of the membrane will repolarize. Repolarize means what? It will regain its original property. It will regain its original voltage difference, that is more positive on the outside and less, more negative on the inside of the plasma membrane of the neuron. Because now the sodium ion channels are inactivated. So here the sodium channels will close and potassium channels will open, so that there is a balance of positive on the more positive outside and more negative inside. So this will cause the repolarization of the previous side, and further the membrane, the further part of the axon will depolarize. Here it is resting, then again the signal will move forward, and by the time this is repolarizing, this will originally turn to its actual original state. Okay, repolarizing means what? Now this site is returning to its original voltage difference, and resting means now it is completely in the resting phase, more positive on the outside, more negative in the inside. And here repolarizing means now sodium ion channels are closed and potassium channels are open, so that the ions move to and fro and they cause more negative in the inside and more positive on the outside. And this is how the signal will move forward from one side to another to the another. Okay, so this is how the generation and conduction and transmission of the electrical impulse will take place. Okay, we'll do a summary again. Focus on what I am discussing, the red mark over here. Don't look at the other part of the screen. Just focus on this part first. This part which I have boxed. Okay. At resting phase, what will happen? Sodium and potassium channels are closed. Okay, sodium and potassium channels are closed. Sodium ions are more on the outside of the neuron, and potassium ions are more in the inside. So more negative inside and more positive outside. This is the plasma membrane. Now second. Now focus over here. Second. Okay. Now this, focus on this part. What happens now? On second, now signal is coming. A stimulus is there. This will cause opening of the sodium channel. You see the channel got opened. Now sodium will come inside of the plasma membrane. If threshold is reached, then action potential is triggered. So that minimum threshold wala signal, if it arises, then there will be an action potential. A signal will be triggered. Okay. Then step number 3, more sodium channels will be open and more sodium ions will come in. So more positive on the outside. Now do you see the change in the membrane potential? Now in step 3, here it is more positive in the inside and negative on the outside. What was the scenario in the resting phase? Totally opposite. Now moving to step number 4. Okay. Now it has caused the action potential. So 3, 4. Now action potential has been conducted. Now it will go back to its original. So now the signal will be passed on forward. So at step number 1, here the signal was. Step 2, the signal passed to the next side. Okay. And step 3, further to the next side. So what is happening at the back side? sodium channels are now getting closed, they are getting inactivated, means what is happening? Repolarization is happening. Potassium will open and potassium will rush out. So here from potassium, it will go outside. Okay. Interior of the cell is now more negative than the outside. And then when there is a balance reached, then the potassium channels will close slowly and slowly and steadily it will return to the resting stage. That is more positive on the outside and more negative on the inside. So this is the summary of the generation and conduction of the nerve impulse. Have a look, thorough look at the whole scenario. Make a note of anything that you have not understood and you can reach out to me in case of any difficulty. I will display a video, a summary video of whatever we have discussed up till now, so that you get a clear understanding. Okay.
Nerve impulse is the sum of mechanical, chemical and electrical disturbances created by a stimulus in a neuron. The conduction of the nerve impulse can be divided into two main phases: resting membrane potential and action membrane potential. Neurons are excitable cells. They may be stimulated by physical, mechanical, chemical, or electrical stimuli. The nerve fiber or axon is covered by a neural, axonal or plasma membrane. The neural membrane has sodium and channels called voltage-gated or regulated channels. These channels open or close according to the electric potential across the membrane. The ion channels of the resting membrane are differentially permeable to ions at different rates. It is more permeable to potassium ions, almost impermeable to sodium ions, and totally impermeable to the negatively charged proteins of the axoplasm. Therefore, the axoplasm inside the axon contains a high concentration of potassium ions, negatively charged proteins, and a low concentration of sodium ions. On the contrary, the extracellular fluid outside the axon contains a low concentration of potassium and a high concentration of sodium. This differential permeability is maintained by a sodium-potassium pump present inside the membrane. The sodium-potassium pump transports 3 sodium ions outside the cell for every 2 potassium ions that enter the cell. This electrical potential difference across the membrane in an unexcited nerve fiber is called resting potential, and the neuron is called a polarized nerve fiber. When a stimulus is applied to a site, say A, on the polarized membrane, the sodium ion channels open and the membrane at the site becomes freely permeable to sodium ions. This leads to a rapid influx of sodium ions that reverses the polarity of the site. That is, the outer surface of the membrane becomes negatively charged and the inner surface becomes positively charged. This reversal of polarity across the 2 sides of the membrane is called depolarization. The electrical potential difference across the plasma membrane at site A is called the action potential. This action potential travels as a wave of depolarization along the length of the nerve fiber in a particular direction and is called the nerve impulse. At site B, the axon membrane has a positive charge on the outer surface and a negative charge on the inner surface. As a result, a current flows on the inner surface from site A to site B. On the outer surface, a current flows from site B to site A to complete the circuit of current flow. This reverses the polarity at the site, and an action potential is generated at site B. Thus, the impulse generated at site A arrives at site B. The sequence repeats along the length of the axon for the impulse to be conducted. At the peak of action potential, the permeability of the membrane to sodium ions decreases, while it becomes more permeable to potassium ions. This is because sodium channels start closing and potassium channels start opening. However, this part of the membrane regains its original polarity within milliseconds, and this phenomenon is called repolarization. A repolarized nerve fiber undergoes a refractory period of a few milliseconds, during which the original ionic distribution is restored by a sodium-potassium pump, which actively transports sodium ions outward and potassium ions inward. This returns the membrane to its resting potential, and the neuron is ready to receive another stimulus. A junction helps transmit the nerve impulse from one neuron to another. These junctions are called synapses. A synapse is formed by the membranes of a presynaptic neuron and a postsynaptic neuron, which may or may not be separated by a gap called the synaptic cleft. There are two types of synapses on the basis of the nature of transfer of information. These are chemical synapses and electrical synapses. Chemical synapses are common in the human system and consist of a presynaptic neuron, synaptic cleft, and a postsynaptic neuron. A presynaptic neuron ends with a synaptic knob. A synaptic knob has a large number of mitochondria and many synaptic vesicles. Each synaptic vesicle contains neurotransmitter chemical molecules such as acetylcholine. The synaptic cleft is a fluid-filled gap between the axon terminal and the dendron of another neuron. So there is no protoplasmic continuity between neurons. When an impulse or action potential arrives at the axon terminal, it stimulates the movement of the synaptic vesicles towards the presynaptic membrane. Synaptic vesicles fuse with the plasma membrane and release their neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft. The neurotransmitters thus released bind to their specific chemoreceptors present on the postsynaptic membrane of the dendron. This binding opens sodium ion channels that allow the entry of ions to generate a new potential in the postsynaptic neuron. This may lead to the development of an excitatory new potential or an inhibitory new potential.
So that's all regarding the summary that whatever we have discussed up till now. So revise it again if you find any difficulty.
Electrical synapses are the less common of the two types.
Reach out to me. And that's all for this video. Now in the next video, we will be starting
The nerve impulse.
Central nervous system, that is the human brain. We will begin with the structure of the brain, the different parts of the brain and its function. Up till now, we have finished discussing the structure of neuron, nerve fiber, then the different types of synapses, how the electrical impulse is generated, conducted, and transmitted. Very important topic with respect to exam point of view also. So do a thorough revision, thorough reading of the previous topic. And in the next video, we will start with human brain. So thank you. Take care. See you in the next video. Bye.